Omar had always loved Ramadan, but this year felt different from the very start. He had just moved to Dallas for a new job at an engineering firm, leaving behind his large, close-knit family in New Jersey. Back home, Ramadan meant his mother knocking on his door before dawn, the smell of eggs and flatbread in the kitchen, and his father's quiet recitation of Quran filling the house. Here, it was just the hum of the refrigerator in a small one-bedroom apartment and the glow of his phone alarm at 4:37 a.m. He would sit alone at his tiny kitchen table, eating a simple suhoor of oatmeal and a banana. Scrolling past photos from back home, his cousins at the mosque, his younger brother setting the table for iftar. By the time he reached the office each morning, he already felt the weight of missing home, mixed with the physical strain of fasting long spring days. Most of his coworkers were friendly but distant, the usual American workplace vibe. Quick jokes, sports talk, and long hours staring at screens. On the first day of Ramadan, around 9:30 a.m., his teammate Jason walked by holding 2 large coffees and said, "Hey man, I grabbed an extra by accident, you want it?" Omar smiled and shook his head. "I'm fasting, it's Ramadan." Jason paused. "Oh right, that's the month where you don't eat during the day, right?" "Yeah," Omar replied. "No food or water from dawn to sunset." Jason let out a low whistle. "Not even water? That's tough." Omar laughed softly. "You get used to it." But he was sure that was true when you were doing it alone in a new city. Lunchtimes were the hardest. The office break room filled with the smell of pizza, burgers, and reheated leftovers, and the sound of soda cans popping open. Omar started taking walks outside just to avoid sitting there with an empty desk and a rumbling stomach. One afternoon, as he returned from a short walk, he found his neighbor from the next desk, Daniel, waiting by his chair. Daniel was in his early 30s, a quiet guy who mostly talked about basketball and weekend hiking trips. "Hey Omar," he said, a little awkwardly. "Can I ask you something about Ramadan?" Omar nodded. "Sure. So, what time do you break your fast today?" Omar checked his prayer app. "About 7:48 p.m. Daniel frowned. "And you really can't drink water before that?" "Nope." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Man, that takes some serious discipline." Omar shrugged. "It's about more than hunger. It's about patience, self-control, remembering people who don't have what we have. It kind of resets you." Daniel nodded, like he was filing that thought away somewhere important. The next evening, Omar got stuck in traffic after work. His head throbbed, his mouth felt dry, and the dashboard clock seemed to move slower than usual. As the sun dipped lower, his phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Hey, you still on the road? Check your backpack's front pocket." Confused, Omar reached over at the red light and unzipped the pocket. Inside was a small Ziploc bag with 3 dates and a tiny bottle of water. His chest tightened. He remembered Daniel had borrowed a charger from his bag earlier that day. He must have slipped them in without saying anything. Omar broke his fast right there in traffic, whispering a short dua before eating a date. I'd eaten dates his whole life, but none had ever tasted that sweet. The next day at work, he turned to Daniel. "You didn't have to do that," Daniel shrugged. "Figured you shouldn't have to sit in traffic starving." I Googled what people eat to break their fast. From then on, Daniel started making small, thoughtful adjustments. When the team planned late afternoon coffee runs, he'd say, "Let's go earlier," glancing at Omar with a subtle nod. During a long project meeting scheduled close to sunset, Daniel spoke up and suggested moving future meetings to mornings, because everyone's more focused then, sparing Omar from having to explain his exhaustion. Once, when a coworker joked loudly, "I'd pass out if I didn't eat all day," Daniel casually replied, "Omar does it for a month every year, and still gets his work done," in a tone that carried quiet respect rather than confrontation. There were no debates about religion, no awkward interrogations, just steady, normal kindness. One Friday near the end of Ramadan, the company organized an after-work team dinner at a barbecue restaurant. Omar thought about skipping. The smell of smoked meat while fasting sounded like torture. But Daniel stopped by his desk that afternoon and said, "You should come." "I called the place earlier." Omar blinked. "You called them?" "Yeah. Asked if they could bring out some dates and water right at sunset." They said, "No problem." I also checked the menu. There are a couple of seafood and vegetarian options that should work for you. Omar didn't know what to say. At the restaurant, when the server placed a small plate of dates in front of him just as the sun set, the rest of the team went quiet for a moment. "So this is the official break fast moment?" someone asked. Omar smiled. Yeah, he made a short prayer under his breath and ate a date. Daniel raised his glass of soda slightly. Respect, man. It wasn't a religious discussion. It was a shared human moment, simple and sincere. Over the next few days, Daniel asked more thoughtful questions, not in a challenging way, but in a curious, reflective one. What's the hardest part of fasting? Probably controlling your temper when you're tired, Omar said with a grin. What's the best part? Danelle asked another time as they walked to the parking lot. Omar thought for a second. It reminds me I'm more than just my physical needs. It brings me back to what actually matters. Gratitude, prayer, being better to people. Daniel nodded slowly. I think a lot of us could use something like that, honestly. When Eid finally arrived, Omar took the day off and joined hundreds of Muslims at a large convention center for prayer. Surrounded by families in colorful clothes, kids running around, and hugs from strangers saying Eid Mubarak, he felt that familiar warmth again, the one he had missed all month. The next workday, he brought a box of assorted pastries to the office. Eid Mubarak, he said, setting them in the break room. That's your holiday after Ramadan, right? Daniel asked. Yeah, Omar said, smiling. A day to celebrate finishing the month and to thank God. Daniel took a pastry. I've got to say, watching you this month was inspiring. I complain if I skip one meal. Omar laughed. Trust me, I complain in my head too. But as he sat back at his desk, he realized something important. He hadn't given Daniel a single lecture about Islam. He hadn't tried to win an argument or prove a point. All he had done was try imperfectly to live his faith with patience and consistency. And in return, someone who didn't share his religion had shown him genuine care and respect. Months later, during a casual conversation about workplace culture, Daniel said to a group of coworkers, Ramadan taught me something this year. Sometimes you understand a faith best not by reading about it online, but by caring about the person who practices it. Omar, overhearing from his desk, felt his eyes sting. Islam had reached a heart not through debates or pressure, but through character, through quiet fasting, steady work, small smiles while tired, and gratitude even when hungry. And it had been strengthened by the kindness of a non-Muslim coworker who chose empathy over indifference. In the end, the most powerful message about Islam in that office hadn't been spoken from a podium. It had been lived between two desks, in shared projects, traffic jams, at sunset. And a few simple dates passed from one human being to another.